Today from the global lane, salvaging the Gaza peace plan. Trump sends Rubio and Vance to Israel to strategize with Netanyahu.
This to show the level of dedication that the White House is giving to this and the level of seriousness that Washington is investing in this process. We'll see what happens with the rollout, but we're teetering right now on the potential for going back into conflict with Hamas.
Putin engages in nuclear force saber-rattling. Is Ukraine his world-changing blunder?
Putin thought it was going to take him about 1 week to conquer the much smaller Ukraine, but a major miscalculation on his part.
Raising 3 children no longer affordable in 39 American metro areas.
Incomes in those parts of the country are a lot lower, whereas child-rearing costs are elevated.
Tourism decline in Jerusalem. Vice President Vance leaves diplomacy behind to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's all right here on the global lane. Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner to the Middle East. President Trump this week sent the diplomats to Israel in hopes of keeping his Gaza peace plan alive. Is the deal about to fall apart before getting to the next phase? Well, joining us is Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman. Greg, why did the president send this team to Israel when it's really Turkey and Qatar that need to pressure Hamas to lay down its weapons?
I think there's a few reasons, but the most important is to keep confidence on the Israeli side that the American government is dedicated to phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire plan. And I think that having those who have the permission of the president to negotiate directly with the other side, being envoys Kushner and Witkoff, and also Vice President Vance, who has not been wholly involved in these negotiations up until this point, is to show the level of dedication that the White House is giving to this and the level of seriousness that Washington is investing in this process. And I wouldn't be surprised that after these meetings in Jerusalem, those envoys will go on to Turkey, will go on to Qatar, will go on to Egypt, not just meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu as the American side, but the head of Egyptian intelligence, thereby trying to show the Egyptians are committed to this as well. So we'll see what happens with the rollout, but we're teetering right now on the potential for going back into conflict with Hamas.
I saw a post on X this week from open source intel quoting Hamas senior official Mohammed Nizal, who said Hamas will not disarm, and he stated the ceasefire is only a hudna, a pause to rebuild the terror group's strength. So how concerned are you that the president and his team are negotiating with terrorists, those who will not give up their goal of destroying Israel?
The way that I see this right now is like Grant giving Lee the terms Appomattox Courthouse. This is an unconditional ceasefire, an unconditional surrender on Hamas's behalf. And if they do not comply, then the president has promised he will allow for IDF forces or an international security force to go in and do the job instead of allowing Hamas to do it by themselves. So I think that that commitment, both promising to engage in dialogue, but if Hamas spurns that dialogue, a full American commitment to allow the Israelis in the West to finish the job against Hamas. So I have no doubt that either by hook or by crook, by ceasefire negotiations or by force, Hamas will be disarmed.
Well, it isn't just Trump. European Union leaders insist that Hamas disarm, and President Trump warned Hamas to get in line or face the consequences.
We made a deal with Hamas that, they're going to be very good, they're going to behave, they're going to be nice, and if they're not, we're going to go and we're going to eradicate them if we have to. They'll be eradicated.
I think this is sort of a repeat of what happened with Ukraine and Russia over the first 6 months of his administration. He tried to meet with President Putin. He had a pretty nasty meeting with President Zelensky in the Oval Office. But at the end of the day, Trump showed that if the other side does not comply with what he is asking for, which I think is a pretty fair deal for Hamas, considering the high crimes that they were involved with on October 7th and for the subsequent 2 years afterwards until the ceasefire came into effect last week, that if Trump is not able to get this by negotiations, he will allow Israel to do it by force. You have this as an instance in 8 other processes that have taken place over the past 10 months, and I think this one will be no different.
Dovi Honig, the founder and CEO of the Orthodox Jewish Chamber of Commerce, wrote an opinion column this week suggesting that Hamas fell into its own trap as President Trump used global optics to free hostages and expose Hamas for what it truly is. And then he argued that Trump's strategy was never about believing Hamas could change. It seemed it was about manipulating the world stage to expose their true nature while protecting Israel's right to act decisively. So is that Trump's plan, in your opinion, to give Israel justification for finishing the job? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that if you look at a piece that I wrote, which echoed similar ideas back about a month ago in September on the Middle East Forum's website, you'll see that the genius lies in Trump's plan's potential for failure. Not that it was intended to not succeed, but there's a fail-safe, a tripwire here, where if Hamas does not comply, either way, it gives legitimacy to Israel to finish the job, either through agreeing to negotiations and the deployment of an international security force, the disarmament of Hamas. We already have the release of hostages, and also improving Gaza's civilian life. But if they don't comply, there's full justification, just like that columnist said, that there is sort of a built-in kill switch, or a dead man switch, if you will, that if the negotiations don't work out, there's full international legitimacy to finish the job.
Greg, you've been involved in the Middle East for so long, for years. So tell me, where do you think this is all heading?
Frankly, I think that Hamas, unless it has pressure from its interlocutors in Istanbul and in Doha, will keep on trying to justify their possession of weaponry. And this only deals with one front where Hamas is active, in Gaza. There's been no mention of the West Bank, no mention of southern Lebanon, no mention of their bases in other areas throughout the Middle East. And the only way that Hamas will be forced to comply not just with the Trump terms in Gaza, but to turn itself into a political party, which I don't think will ever happen. Hamas will never disarm unless by force in other fronts, is by agreeing to the Trump conditions. And if they do not, Trump will have to force Qatar and Turkey to impose their own measures to kick Hamas out of those two capitals, and in doing so, leave Hamas without a lifeline in Gaza, thereby giving them two options: one, to disarm, or to be destroyed by the IDF.
Okay, seems like the ultimate demise of Hamas. Middle East Forum Director Greg Roman. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tensions continue to rise as the U.S. military conducts ongoing strikes against narco-traffickers in the Caribbean. President Trump has now vowed to cut off aid to Colombia, accusing its president of being an illegal drug leader. This development coincides with the cancellation of a proposed summit regarding the Ukraine war in Budapest by President Trump and Putin. Here to share some insights is historian Jared Knott. His new book is Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2. The many tiny mistakes that change the world forever. Jared, let's begin with Venezuela and Colombia. Is Trump's policy of striking the speedboats of narco-terrorists transporting fentanyl and other drugs to the United States a historic blunder? What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm a big believer in going to the basic facts, the basic statistics, numbers of the situation, and that will usually tell you what's happening at the top, never mind the speeches and the blather, the propaganda. Now, the basic facts are that in 2023, I think it's the latest year from which numbers are available, we had 72,000 people to die of overdoses in the United States. I think the year before, maybe as high as 102,000. The majority of those deaths come from fentanyl, but of course there's cocaine and other things involved as well. Well, where do those drugs come from? They come from Mexico, they come from Colombia, they come from Venezuela. They are they're complicit in killing tens of thousands of Americans, usually young people, experimenting with drugs. Now, in addition to that, 72,000, there are tens of thousands of other people who become addicted to drugs and have their lives ruined. Yes, dramatic and aggressive action should be taken to stop it, and it's well justified.
So no blunder there, and Trump has targeted Nicolas Maduro, the unelected president of Venezuela. Recently, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Maria Corina Machado, the leader of the Venezuelan pro-democracy movement. Did Maduro make a significant blunder by remaining in office despite clearly losing that presidential election to Machado and the opposition?
Well, he'll know, and we'll know in the next probably a year or 6 months, whatever. He should have retired gracefully, maybe stolen a bunch of money, put it in a Swiss bank account, and retired to the south of France or something like that. Because I think he made some kind of a generous offer to the United States, some kind of major compromise, and it was turned down. And you kind of almost, I don't know what's going to happen, but you kind of get the feeling that the Trump administration may want him gone and may not be willing to settle for any kind of compromises. It's certainly a very corrupt regime, corrupt with narco money. gangsters. He's a gangster running the entire country. He was twice defeated with a legitimate election. So he may have, in hindsight, maybe he should have just taken a big chunk of his stolen gains and gone to a safe haven and not tried to hang on. Yes.
Yeah, maybe a blunder there on his part. So what about Ukraine? Trump refused to provide President Zelensky with Tomahawk missiles this week. It doesn't seem like a mistake in hindsight, especially considering that Putin had threatened World War III. So when we examine history, it's striking how one small blunder can lead to disaster. I know in January 2022, President Biden suggested that Putin might move across the border, and he referred to it as a minor incursion, implying a degree of leniency. But what is your perspective on that comment and the war in Ukraine? Were there any mistakes made?
Well, I think Putin miscalculated back, I guess it's been well over 3 years ago, when he invaded in the first place. He thought it was going to take him about 1 week to conquer the much, much smaller Ukraine. He was not counting on the determination of a free people willing to fight and die to remain free. And so there's been almost no progress made in terms of territory gain, very little in these last 3.5 years. So I think that was not, I call it a tiny blunder. I guess it was kind of a major miscalculation on his part.
Can you give us one blunder that you mentioned in your new book, one that worked out well?
My favorite one that worked out well, and this is a classic, changed the course of human history. And the Professor Fleming at the St. Mary's Hospital in London, 1928, was a Slav of Slavs. He's the patron saint of Slavs everywhere, but a brilliant man, a brilliant scientist. So anyway, he was going to vacation in Scotland for 2 weeks, and he left a lot of dirty dishes, petri dishes, smeared with bacteria in his lab, and he left an open window. Okay, so I'll see you in 2 weeks. He takes off. And in the meantime, a spore came blowing in through the window, a small mole landed in one of the dishes. It happened to be a penicillin mole. Okay, he comes back in 2 weeks, and to his great credit, he looks at the dish and sees a clear halo around where the penicillin mold has landed. And it strikes him a huge insight. Penicillin mold is a killer. It can kill bacteria. But in 1942, we have penicillin in large quantities, saving millions of lives.
And we thank God for that open window. Okay, many more in the book, Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Tiny Mistakes That Changed the World Forever. The first book was fascinating. I'm sure history lovers like me will enjoy reading this one. So, Jared Knott, thank you for being with us.
Yes, go to tinyblundersbigdisasters.com at the website.
Here on the home front, federal workers and members of the U.S. military aren't the only ones struggling during the government shutdown. High interest rates and the high cost of living are taking a toll on married couples. Recent research by Investors Observer found that the typical married couple cannot afford to raise 3 children in 39 major American metro areas. Here to explain is Investors Observer financial analyst Sam Berge. Sam, what is happening? Which cities are the worst ones for a family of 5?
Well, it's a bit counterintuitive because you would think that a lot of these cities would be some of the more expensive parts of the country, like San Francisco, LA, et cetera. But what we're finding is when we did the study, we compared average incomes across the country. And when you compare average incomes to living expenses, you find that the cities with the biggest affordability gap, or the cities in which people can't afford their children to raise their children based on all the needs that they require, are Philadelphia, Detroit, Cleveland, and down in McAllen, Texas. So again, it's a bit counterintuitive, but incomes in those parts of the country are a lot lower, whereas child rearing costs are elevated. And when you combine the two, you see that those are the areas that have the most affordability challenges. But as you mentioned at the outset, this is a pervasive issue across the country. In 39 of the 50 top metros, we have these affordability issues. People can't seem to have the ends to raise children properly based on all of the transportation, housing, and leisure activities that children require in order to be successful.
Well, that's one reason I think Zohran Mamdani is popular in New York, is because one thing he's talking about is childcare and the cost of childcare.
Right.
I'm sure that's a big issue, but we hear a lot about high interest rates. Is there any indication that the Fed will finally lower them when it meets next week?
Yes, there's all indication now that the Fed will cut rates next week, and then again probably in December. So we're anticipating two more cuts this year following the September cut. If you take a look at some of the derivatives markets, actually some of these traders, these Wall Street bigwigs, they're expecting even one 50 basis point cut sometime this year, either in October or December. That doesn't seem to be the consensus view yet, and I don't want to say that's a guarantee, but that just means that people on Wall Street now, the investors, are also expecting for there to be more aggressive rate cuts now as the Fed has to shift its focus from inflation to the employment picture, which has deteriorated over the past year.
Well, that'll definitely be better news for the economy for 2026. So what about now, the tariffs? What impact are they having on these couples that you talk about and all Americans? Are prices increasing on many imported goods?
Well, this is a very interesting point because so far it seems like a lot of the producers themselves, the wholesalers, they've actually absorbed most of the impact so far. We had some research from Goldman Sachs that showed that I think about 2/3 of the import costs or the tariff hikes have been absorbed by companies, but that's beginning to change as of October. Moving forward, we are expecting tariffs to trickle into consumer prices, and it's going to do so probably over the next year or two. And we could see the impact well into 2027 based on some of the research. So if you take a look at the pass-through rates, it's eventually going to trickle down to the consumer. And that looks like it could start to be happening now in the fourth quarter, heading into next year, as a lot of these companies say we can't shoulder anymore. We have to start passing on these higher costs to consumers. That's what we're expecting next. That's the next domino to fall.
Well, we get a lot of our goods from China, and Trump meets with President Xi next week. There's been a dispute over rare earth metals, and Trump has proposed increasing tariffs on China from the truce level, the current level of 30%, by another 100%. And even the U.S. president says that's unsustainable. So what do you expect is going to happen when the two presidents meet and discuss this in South Korea?
I expect by now I've seen Trump's approach to tariffs and trade quite a bit. I think this is a negotiating tactic. Ultimately, I do think Trump wants to make a deal. We know China also wants to make a deal. There's a lot of posturing going on right now. As the president said, it's really unsustainable to keep tariffs at this level. This is basically a bargaining chip to ensure that more productive capacity comes back to America eventually. When that's going to happen, that's subject to a lot of debate. I know a lot of these big tech companies right now are promising hundreds of billions of dollars in investment, especially into AI and data centers, bringing more of that production back home. But I think Trump's trying to reorient the economy back towards the domestic production, and that's going to require a lot of short-term pain in the wake of tariffs, and also when it comes to a lot of this tariff rhetoric. But I do expect positive developments to come out next week when they meet. At least maybe an extension of the tariff truce beyond November 1st. That I think might be a good stopgap as they continue to negotiate something more fruitful.
And finally, Sam, the government shutdown, it's costing the economy as much as $2 billion per day. And Democrats want to restore another trillion and a half in budget spending for ACA subsidies, Medicaid. Meanwhile, the U.S. national debt is close to $38 trillion, and that is unsustainable. So what needs to be done?
Well, that's the big question. I don't personally think there's really any political resolve on either side of the spectrum to really tackle this issue. If you take a look at a debt level that big, there's really not a lot of ways in which you can address that. A lot of the medicine that we're going to need is going to be something that politicians especially, are not going to want to take. They're not going to want to give us the policies that are going to lead to a lower deficit. So I think we have been seeing tariff revenue increase. That's a positive. But again, as you mentioned, spending continues to surge through the roof. In the immediate term, the really big impact of the government shutdown is there's a lack of data coming out. So we really don't know how to gauge the performance of the economy. We don't have the CPI figures. We didn't get the non-farm payrolls numbers. That's kind of been keeping everybody on ice. There's a bit of a data blackout right now. It's been a lot harder for us to evaluate the health of the economy as this drags on. But, this is becoming a lot more common, these shutdowns over the last decade or so. So I think we're not even, I think, halfway through the longest one that we saw. So there could be a little bit of time longer before this thing gets resolved.
Okay, Sam Berge, Investors Observer. Thank you, Sam, for joining us. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to Israel this week to strengthen support and strategy for Phase 2 of President Trump's Gaza peace plan. This was the vice president's second trip to Israel. He informed reporters that this time he planned to take a break from diplomacy to visit a holy site he had not yet explored.
I hope to go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which Christians believe is the site that Jesus Christ was crucified in. And I know that Christians have many titles for Jesus Christ, and one of them is the Prince of Peace. And I'd ask all people of faith, in particular my fellow Christians, to pray that the Prince of Peace can continue to work a miracle in this region of the world. I think that we have made incredible strides over the past week. We're going to have to make a lot more, but I think with your prayers, with God's providence, and with a very good team behind me, I think we're going to get it done. Thank you all. Take care.
From Jerusalem, our CBN News correspondent Paul Petit reports that the Garden Tomb of Jesus is empty in more ways than one. The tourism industry in Israel is currently nearly non-existent. The COVID-19 pandemic, followed by the October 7th attack and the war against Hamas in Gaza, have taken a devastating toll on the Israeli tourism industry. Tourism in the Holy Land has plummeted by more than 70% over the past 2 years, with 3.5 million fewer visitors compared to the record-setting year of 2019. This has resulted in a $3.4 billion loss for the Jewish state. The Upper Room, the popular site of the Last Supper of Jesus and his disciples, is no longer vibrant with visitors. The Via Dolorosa, the path Jesus walked carrying his cross on the way to his crucifixion, is deserted. Throughout East Jerusalem, shops and other businesses are closed. What better way for Christians and Jews to show support for Israel than by traveling there on a pilgrimage or tour? Did you know that Jerusalem is about a 90-minute drive from Gaza, far removed from the fighting taking place there? A visit to the Holy Land, experiencing its sites, history, and culture will change your perspective and maybe even your life. So go and visit, show your love for the Jewish state, and as always, as J.D. Vance requested, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Well, that's it from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.